Not quite yet.
Very close to.
Cool. Well, I will introduce myself. I'm the chair for this session. I'm Michael. I work with Anil at Cambridge, and what I do for the kind of life metric that Drew put up earlier, I did a bunch of the computing kind of behind that, and so I write a lot of software that is kind of for consumption and use by ecologists, and so I'm kind of super interested in this session, which is kind of software engineering and ecosystems, kind of looking at how we can kind of work, kind of improve practices and tools in that area. And so our first speaker is Vashti Galpin, sorry, yes. Who's going to take a look at when we're generating the kind of all these software artifacts for ecologists, kind of how we assess the quality and kind of reusability of those tools for kind of other projects. So with further ado, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I don't think the first sentence on my slide is at all something we need to question. Research software is really important. And I became aware during my work, and I'll say a bit more about that on the next slide, the different scientific disciplines are approaching this in different ways, and they often don't know about what each other are doing. So I gave a talk a while back at the Research Software Engineering Conference about this, and when I saw the opportunity here, I thought I'd like to tell you about it. It fascinates me, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. So I'll say a bit about who I am and where I've come from. I'll speak about general goals for research software. What do we want it to achieve? What's happening currently in climate science? I got a bit confused about terminology as I was preparing this because there are a lot of different words used, but I will usually use the term climate science. And thank you to the two reviewers who said, you're not talking enough about climate science in your talk. So I am now. And then I'll talk about specifically something that comes from computer science, from the programming languages and software engineering and databases community. And then if I have time, I'd just like to add a little thing about the allocation of research software effort from a paper that I read recently. So this, I'm not going to say things new. I'm not presenting any new research. I'm giving an overview of what's out there. So I've been a researcher for a number of years, fixed terms contracts, unfortunately. And what I used to do was a lot of modeling using a process algebra approach to stochastic modeling of systems. So over the years, I've worked on the theory of that, and I've also constructed a lot of models. And reading up on climate science makes me realize that the spatial and temporal modeling I did in that area definitely applies here. Another thing I was involved in, and I'm not seeing a lot of this in climate science, is we were able to use a fluid approximation. So instead of modeling individuals, we were modeling populations, and this is very powerful. And I just want to say, fluid in this context has nothing to do with Rowley's presentation. It's a different type of fluid. So right now, I develop applications in the Linux programming language, which was developed at Edinburgh, and we have people involved in that here, Phil and Sam. And so one of the things I do is develop applications to show that we can use Linux for useful things, not just toy programs. And of course, Linux itself is an experimental language, so there's a bit of meta going on there. And what I'm focusing on, so Linux supports language integrated query. The idea is you write in a single language, and that enables the generation of provably correct SQL, as well as front-end stuff, such as JavaScript. And I've been looking at that. I work with James Cheney in the context of data provenance, temporal databases, curated scientific databases, and right now I have a metrology project. And metrology is not to be confused with meteorology. That's about weather. So metrology is the science of measurement. And the National Physical Laboratory, based in Teddington, is where this happens in the UK. They've got other sites as well. So I have a project, James and I have a project with them, which is about digital calibration certificates. So they're doing a whole process of digitalization right now. And part of that is they're worried about update provenance over these certificates and So I'm working with them. And interestingly, there are people at Teddington who also work in Earth's observation and sensor data and correct calibration of sensors. So actually, calibration of sensors is becoming a major issue in metrology. And then the other bubbles are things that I'm particularly interested in. Research software engineering generally, it's whether people have sustainable careers, whether they're research staff or research software engineers. And there's a whole lot about fair data, open science, quality, all of these things. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I'm quite happy because it feels like all these separate strands of what I've done have kind of come together into one thing. There's been a lot of discussion about research software as well as research data, but I'm going to focus on software here. And there are goals that have been described as important. So respect is one. This comes from the programming languages community, that software is important as publications. If you're going to publish something in PROPL that talks about a piece of software, well, really that software should be available. Reusability. Can somebody else use the software? Can they extend the software? And we've always seen that extending models is important in climate science. Then there are three terms, well, actually more, but I haven't put them all on the slide, that talk about repeating experiments or doing the same thing. So there's repeatability, which is the idea that the same results can be obtained by the authors with their software. You would hope that to be true. It gets a bit tricky when you're dealing with stochastic stuff, but if you use the same random seed, then hopefully it will be the same. Reproducibility, where somebody can take the piece of software and get the results again, somebody else. And then reproducibility is a much further goal, which is somebody can somehow reproduce the whole science. And I like to think of this as similar to N-version programming. So for space missions, often they will have multiple versions of a program to do something written by different people, and then they poll to see if it's correct. So that's the lens I see replicability through. But today I'm just going to really focus on reusability and reproducibility. And the important thing here is, of course, we need availability for either of those two things to happen. So I've used some color coding just to highlight when I talk about these things going further. When I did the previous presentation, I kind of came up with a landscape of what's happening in research software engineering, and I don't want to go through the slide, it would take far too long, but it's incomplete. I'm trying to capture some ideas here, and I would say the things at the top are very much about principles and support for these goals of reusability and reproducibility. And the things at the bottom are very much more about assessment and evaluation. So are the principles met? And I think there's a lot more work being done on the principles and support, and this is a much newer area. So what I'd like to talk about first is some ideas of what's already happening in climate science. I did a literature survey, a quick one, so I don't claim to be complete, but here's some ideas. So first of all, there was a very nice National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine book about reproducibility, and it had a specific section on geoscience, which you can say climate science research falls under that. And the discipline had certain characteristics. It's a study of phenomena in environments which you can't control. Use of simulation is crucial. Building simulation models, both to look at past behavior and to predict future behavior. And hand in hand goes with this is validation. So is your simulation a good simulation of what's there? Let me see. Are you getting the right equations? And then verification, correctness of code. Are you getting the equations right when you implement them? Sorry, did I say that right? Okay, I won't, yeah, was it, okay. And another thing that's come in is big data. Sensor networks are giving us lots of data. There's a whole Earth observation. And big data is characterized by its volume, its velocity, and its variety. And I think another aspect in climate science is the high levels of external scrutiny. One of the articles I read, the author had originally worked as an astrophysicist, and he said, nobody cares in astrophysics whether you're right or not, but here it's a lot more important. And in climate science, there's been a lot of discussion going on about open science, open data, a focus on the FAIR principles. Okay. For those of you who don't know the FAIR principles, that's the data and software should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So I would say the same general debates are going on in climate science as many other sciences. Journals have interesting policies, from the very soft contact the authors is not acceptable to the desk rejection if code is not open source. So there's certainly a gradation of how available code should be. And there was also recommendations for sustainable research software in Earth System Science, a document for Germany, and it was about sustainable careers for RSEs, reduce the use of fixed-term funding to pay people on fixed-term contracts, the importance of software management plans, which not only says what will happen to the software during the research, but what's going to happen to the software afterwards, and the need for funding for maintenance and support of that software. Also, there was a really important point is that major research software should be funded as though it's research infrastructure. It's as important as things like the Hadron Collider. You know, it needs that ongoing support. There's lots of papers that have been written, surveys to say what's the situation in climate science. I won't go into the details of that. And discussions. I particularly like the picture. Yeah.
Is it okay if you can use that because we've had complaint on YouTube?
Oh, okay. Okay. Can people hear me better now? Okay. Yes. Okay. Apologies to those online. I've often thought that actually we need an additional screen in the room at the back so we can actually see the people online and feel that they're part of the event. Yeah. I just want to say these terms, replicability, reproducibility, runnability, they're all quite complex, and I really like the diagram with the screens because it's talking about whose computer you run it on and what software it is, but I won't go into the details of that. So there is ongoing assessment of research software in climate science, and ironically, it's a bit of climate science that overlaps with computer science. So Agile, which has nothing to do with the approach to writing software, is an association of geographic information labs in Europe, and they have a mandatory review process post-acceptance for anything submitted to their conference. Something that's purely theoretical doesn't have to go through this review. Well, they go through and they say, okay, you've got nothing to be checked. Just carry on. And I've also come across a proposal for badging systems in remote sensing research. So let me talk just for a bit. Also in the climate science, we've got assessment of models. So there's a coupled modeled in comparison project. It's now gone into version 6, and it enables things such as the graph. This is the output of a whole lot of models. The red is the model average, and the black is the real information. And as one of the books I was reading says, the best model is all the models. So this is about models, and it's evaluating them by doing comparison. And actually, software is being written to do that evaluation. So there's software such as the Earth System Model Evaluation Tool. And it's not clear to me how that has been evaluated as a piece of research software. So we have layers of layers. And I wanted to contribute what we do in computer science to this discussion. So the ACM has this process of artifact review and badging. And I apologize for the colors. For anybody who's colorblind, they weren't my choice. So the green means availability. Something's available. And for those of you who've been to various talks in PROPL', you will have seen these badges. There's a reproducibility badge, a replicability badge, and then two usability badges. One is just functional, which says it does exactly what it says it should, and then reusable is a bit broader than that. Do be careful.
Go back, I didn't know. What's the difference between results reproduced and results replicated?
Can I carry on to the next slide? Because I'll actually explain it. Please be aware that up until August 2020, the ACM had these definitions switched around, and there are reasons, there are good reasons why this confusion came up. So it's actually switched now. So reproducibility means you take the existing software and you rerun it to see if you get the same output as the original people. Replicability means you go back a further step and write your own software and see if you get the same results. And this is confusing because I actually have 2 papers that have replicability badges on them, but they're actually not. So the ACM has not gone back and changed the previous badges. I think maybe they should. So this was a process that was developed in the software engineering programming languages community, and the idea was not so much to badge, but to say, this paper says this software does X, does it actually meet those expectations? But we now have quite a bit more formal badging process, and database conferences also did this as well. It's common in certain bits of computer science, less common in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and where you need specialist equipment. The process is typically, right now, a paper gets accepted, either at a journal or a conference, and it's optional whether you send it through onto the next process. So it's a separate process. Unfortunately, I'm seeing a trend in AI and machine learning to ask the paper reviewers to do artifact evaluation, which, in my opinion, is just the wrong place to do it. There's just not enough space. And criteria tend to be community specific. I've shown you the ACM badges. There are some other ones as well. This has been going on for quite a while, so there has been assessment and reflection. So what should we measure when we're assessing the process, and how do we avoid Goodhart's law, that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, and how to improve the process. So one thing that has come up is this separation of availability from evaluation. So the idea that you shouldn't necessarily have to go through the process, you can just say availability. And there's a whole amount of literature about this, and I have some references about that. So that's really what I want to say about this process. Is that 2 minutes or before questions?
2 minutes with questions.
With questions, okay. Let me talk about this really quickly. So this is the idea. It came from a paper I read. The idea is you've got this is one of the software development models, the V model. So at the bottom, the green bit is the traditional model. And if you're a scientist doing this thing, you get some data, you build a mathematical model, you build a numerical scheme, and then you have the testing coming out. And the question this paper asked is, where are you putting your effort? So at some level, if you work with an existing simulator, some of the software I've written before, been involved with, actually, you just work at this level, and all of this is somebody else's software engineering effort. If you look at something like MATLAB, you have to go a bit deeper. If you're looking at libraries such as NumPy, you go further down. And if you write in a general purpose language, you're taking on the whole stack. And one question that I didn't answer for myself is, where do DSLs fit into the scheme? Are they at the MATLAB level? Are they at the libraries level? So this quote says, this could all look like an additional burden, but we need it for doing good science. We want to be productive, and particularly with climate science, there is urgency. So what can we learn from each other? What bridges can we build? And what are the next steps? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. At the end of this session, we got 3 talks and then we got discussion section. So if you've got kind of vague reasoning on it, on this, kind of maybe wait till that session. But if you got anything specific for, actually we'd take a question now. And Roland, do you also want to kind of get set up while?
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just, so you're saying which of these are we doing for DSL? I'm just trying to look at what you've written to see if I can
Yeah.
get any sense of what the answer might be? Or do you have any
I'm pretty certain
idea
it's
yourself?
there or there. It's probably here.
So why is it not like a general purpose language? Because you need to write software for the DSL.
Yes, but but you hope that somebody else has done all the testing for it. So it's where you put your effort. So it's not saying you don't need this whole process. It's just saying if you work here, then somebody else does this. But if you work in a general purpose language, then you have to do this whole thing as well.
And it's a good of the domain, right?
So this is not for somebody implementing a DSL, but for somebody using a DSL.
Yes,
Where
sorry,
does
for
their
somebody,
effort
yes,
come?
yes.
I see,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
so that'd be very similar to libraries,
yeah,
perhaps.
yeah.
I misunderstood the question. Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the people who came up with this.
I've actually got a quick question,
Yeah.
which is, it's maybe just a kind of semantic thing, but early on you talk about the software being kind of checked or kind of tested. Often these things end up being kind of pipelines of bits of software, and some goes into a spreadsheet, some is in R, some
Yes,
is in.
yes.
Like, how does that fit into?
I think that's still an open question.
That's
It's
cool.
Ideally you would provide a workflow, and somebody would work
But
through
it's
that.
it's kind of
workflow.
still.
Yeah. So I think one of my artifacts had a bit of a workflow in it. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
And documentation is the solution to that.
Okay.
Hopefully. Well,
Okay.
partial
Okay.
solution.
Well, can we thank the speaker?